right, it's another episode of PEBAheads here. We've got Michael and I as the usual guest, or I guess host of this show. But we do have a special guest today. Let me do the right view so everyone's not looking just at Brian. All right. Well, I just gave away the guest, Brian.
Yeah, that
We
was
got
a that was
Brian
a
from
spoiler
Tempe.
alert. Hey, thank you guys. I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, no, appreciate it. And I think the best part about this is just that we get to dive in, learn more about different teams, and put a face to the name so it's not just text and Slack all the time. Like people get to know people a little bit better and just kind of give us something to get a little bit extra more PEBA talk. So we'll dive right in. You know, when did you join PEBA?
Oh
Do you
yeah.
remember what year it was?
Yeah, so it would have been the summer of 2011. I joined, which in game it was right at the end of the 2014 season. Because I took over, I was running Crystal Lake, and I took them over from a guy that was there. He was there for like a year, not even a year, I think. And he had taken over from Dean Geisey, who was like this one of those sort of like early game mythical figures, I think, in PEBA lore now. The guy built like this monster in Crystal Lake that was, pumping out like 110 win seasons almost every year. Um, and then yeah, so somebody came in to fill his spot. He only lasted a season, so I joined on the heels of that in 2014, and then stuck with them until 2023, when I think the whole league went through obviously quite a bit of turnover right in there.
Yeah. Did you end up leaving during that time as well?
Yeah, I did. I did. I left for gosh, it was so in the middle of all the madness, we also managed to acquire two children somewhere along the way between multiple overseas postings, and so it was kind of like lots of things coalescing at the time that just sort of conspired to take my PEBA career, or at least derail it. So yeah, I left. I think it was either at the beginning or the end of the 23 season. Um, I seem to recall that using a bunch of draft picks that year that I had stockpiled because I didn't want to let those go to waste. I was coveting draft picks too much to not use them. And so somewhere after that, it became too much to try and hang on and actually do a good job maintaining the team. So yeah, no, I left, and then I think came back to the league in 2031 in game, obviously. Um, to take over PEBA because I had already reached out to Mike and been in conversation with him about taking another team over when they came available, and that was when he sort of pitched the idea that they were going to start bringing back or the next round of independent league teams.
That's actually a good thing that you brought that up. How did you enjoy? Because did you get a chance? I don't remember if they started that with your group or if it was afterwards. Did you get a chance to play around at the WIL and kind of get ready, or?
Yeah, we did. So Dan went from Bakersfield to Nehama, and I obviously jumped right in with Tempe. Um, and I think we were still called the Long Beach Oilers when I took over.
Yep.
Because when Tempe moved to the independent league, the WIL, they were rebranded and everything else. I think with the intent of sort of retiring the Tempe Knights moniker. And so I took over them. Dan took over Nehama, and we both had. I think it was 2031. I'd have to go back and double check that. Of course, I could.
That's what it says. Yeah, in the
Yeah,
records online.
yeah. So it was 2031. We both managed them throughout that season with the intent of like, hey, giving the teams a year to sort of get their house in order in advance of a return to PEBA. And so we did that, and it was as you well know, Mike, it was pretty dull. I'm not gonna
Yeah,
lie.
it was definitely dull, and I think this is probably a tangent if we weren't expecting to go this way, but it's kind of good that you're probably the first person on other than me that's gotten to experience it so far. How did you like it? I know, to your point, absolutely dull. I mean,
Yeah,
you can only what, trade with a bunch of AI, which you're sending your trades to to the board and seeing if they agree, if it made sense, and you weren't completely ripping them off. Other than that, every free agent want to have nothing to do with you unless you overpay them by like 3 to 5 times or something ridiculous. So there's a lot of just sitting on your thumbs doing nothing. But I guess, do you feel that you were able to set yourself up so that once Tempe came back to PEBA, that at least you got like a good start? Because I don't remember, did you start off right away with like a rebuild once you got into PEBA? Because you ran
Yeah.
into the same issue that I did and everyone else did, obviously, is that, you know, here goes a team with nobody as far as minor league squads, and now you got to fill 5 minor league squads and figure it out from there.
Yeah, no, my Tempe was there were 2 or 3 guys actually in the organization that were solid. I don't want to, you know, bemoan the state of the franchise. I mean, they were terrible, to be very clear, and had no, you know, infrastructure or development. There were almost no prospects within the organization. It was pretty barren. But yeah, we launched into PEBA, embarking on a total rebuild, which for me, to be clear, like that was actually what I wanted. You know, I was like chomping at the bit to find a way, basically the entire time I was managing Crystal Lake, to you know, sell everything off and like rebuild the entire organization, just because that's sort of how I always play OOTP. And so getting an opportunity to do that with Tempe was like really appealing to me, and that's part of the reason that I jumped in and did it. Because I thought it would be cool to, you know, sort of see if I could actually. I mean, I inherited a really good franchise when I took over Crystal Lake, which is cool. You know, it's nice winning, but it's also nice trying to build something yourself. I mean, that's sort of what I think is
completely different experience.
Yeah, totally different experience, and a lot of the fun of the game for me. So my intent there was to come back with Tempe and see if, especially because Tempe had always been like historically one of the also-rans of the league. I mean, one of the reasons that they got relegated in the first place was because they were always like the smallest market, right, lowest budget team that had just gotten basically the crap kicked out of them ever since that brief stint of success there in like the 2011, 12, 13 range when they won the championship.
We
But
talked about
it was
that
like
on
the
the
curse of
last
Hancock or
podcast.
something. Yeah. I mean, you can see on there, right? Like in the PEBA, they haven't even won 90 games since 2013, which is, I mean, that's not that's not really high benchmark to clear. Of course, I still haven't done it, so God knows when it's actually going to happen.
I think you're close. If it's not this year, it's next year.
I mean, I would have liked to have thought it was last year. You see right there, before we got on here, I was complaining about that.
Yeah, 15
Pythagoras.
Pythagorean.
Yeah, -9. I don't know. I'm optimistic that maybe we'll hit that 90 win mark this year. Although, if you talk to me, you know, at the end of June in game there, I was a hell of a lot more optimistic than I am now. So who knows?
Definitely getting tight again.
Well, that kind of leads into our next question. Do you feel like you're a contender this season to not only be in the playoffs, but win it all?
Yeah, contender to be in the playoffs. Yeah, certainly. I mean, I definitely think, and that's, you know, I hate that, by the way, that old like residual graphics with the uniform that Mike so painstakingly put together for me.
Yeah.
It drives me crazy that
it's
we can't
just because
those.
Sean doesn't know what he's doing. That's all.
Well, that's what's funny is like I go in, and that's what I was going to ask you was like later a question about your logo.
I will have to walk you through it, Sean, how to get all of your jerseys and everything. It's probably just a folders thing.
Well, it's crazy because Mike has sent me the file. I've put it in, and it updates certain people. Because like when I go on my team, like I'll see that like it finally updated, like my organization, it finally updated all the logos. So I actually have like my real logos instead of I had just like the standard default ones. But yeah, it's crazy how like hit or miss it is on when it works and when it doesn't, because it definitely is not working for you.
Yeah, no. So yeah, just to answer the question there, I mean, I think we're definitely a contender for the playoffs, right? And that was sort of my goal coming back in, was to build a team that was capable of sort of like hitting that 90, 95 win plateau every year. Because frankly, even when I was running Crystal Lake, you know, we've got a lot of really talented people in this league, a lot of talented managers. I mean, and even if I was winning 110, 115 games a year, like it didn't really seem to matter because it's still a crapshoot when you get in the playoffs, as a lot of us I think have discussed in the past. So I mean, the idea was build a team that's capable of reaching the playoffs. You know, take your chances, see if you can get it done when you actually arrive there.
Yep.
I agree.
No, makes
And then once you
sense.
can get to the playoffs, at least you're making the money. I think that should be the goal, especially since they added the additional wild card spot. Is just get to the playoffs. That every little bit of extra money is going to help you kind of grow and move forward,
Yeah.
rather than sitting there and constantly just missing out or starting to get stuck in those cycles of rebuilds that never end. And sometimes you got to get aggressive and do things you're not used to doing or not comfortable doing just so you can get into that plateau of winning enough to get up.
Yeah, and that's been an interesting sort of debate that I think you guys have had across several podcasts, and I don't remember who it was specifically that mentioned it. I'm not sure if it was the last episode or maybe the one before that, but one of you guys was talking about sort of that jump. I like the dog, by the way. That jump you make right from you know, like the 83, 84, 85 sort of win plateau to like playoff team. I underestimated how hard it was going to be to make that leap in our game, because obviously it's the first time I've tried to do it. And I probably bent Sean's ear at some point. You know, I mean, I feel like in a lot of cases, what I'm actually ended up doing is making like marginal improvements at positions at a tremendous expense, right? Like I'm giving up a cost control guy who's, you know, $2 or $3 or $4 million a year in favor of some guy who's going to pull down 20 million a year in order to boost my team by, you know, like 1 or 2 WAR. I think a good example there is our DH position, right? Which currently we're trotting John Pulsfer out there, who has been, you know, historically pretty solid. I mean, he's had a few fairly dominant years, some more mediocre than others. This year he's been pretty lousy, frankly. But you know, up to that point, I had been using a platoon there at the DH spot with a guy named Eng Hee Chin, so who I don't know, I think grabbed from Okinawa in like the first or second Rule 5 draft that I'd been in, and gosh, I don't even know, a cast of others, right? But the production has been almost the damn same, frankly. And I'm paying Pulse for $25 million a year, and Chin was getting like $1.5 million, right? And I could sort of go across the board and find other examples of that, but that's been sort of commonplace. Is, you know, I'm pursuing these upgrades to try and make the team more competitive. Catcher's another one. I just made the trade this offseason for Perez from Kalamazoo. I traded away obviously a pretty high impact starter with Tatsui Suzuki for him. And now, you know, Perez, like, he's been good. He's been better than the catchers that I've had out there. But I also had a platoon at catcher last year that was reasonable. I think they put together a 1.5, 2 WAR aggregate. And so I anticipate I'll probably end up with what, 3 or 4 WAR out of Perez. But I'm paying him $25.5 million or something like that. And I think that the two guys together last year were making like 2.5, you know, so it's like trying to find ways to make that jump. It's just that's been a real grind for me. And I think part of the problem is that when I put the team together, I was anticipating a little bit more growth from quite a few of our prospects along the way. And frankly, that just hasn't really materialized. Like the guys have gotten to the major league level and then they plateaued and they just haven't continued to progress. And it's like, well, that guy I thought was going to be a 4 WAR player is now all of a sudden like a 2.5 WAR player. And he's like, he's okay, but he's not really going to get me anywhere, so to speak, or at least not to achieve the objectives I'd set out for. So now I have to figure out a way to upgrade for him, you know, which means at the expense of like the long-term interests of the organization and yada yada. So yeah, it's just been sort of a vicious cycle that I feel like we've been stuck in now for 2 years. like nibbling at the edges of the roster, trying to figure out how we can improve it without trading away everything I have, in terms of future assets.
Yeah, and that is the struggle, and then you don't want to bring someone in that blocks one of your minor league players that's almost, close to the making a PEBA debut, and then you're trying to, get into that whole debate of how you handle that. You got a couple hitters that are close in the minors, and it's just like, where do you decide? When do you decide to bring them up? And you have to kind of have that step back thought process of like, okay, is this guy going to help me now versus do I just wait till next year and have him do the full year at the level, bring them up at spring training, see what they do, and go from there.
Right. Yeah, and for a while, I think we've been sort of log jammed at first base DH, right? Which a lot of teams probably are. It's this glut of players on our roster that really are positionless. I mean, unless you want to trot them out there as a bad fielding first baseman, which I guess you can do. And so trying to figure out like how to sort of break that logjam because everybody's got them, and it's not like they're really super valuable assets on their own, unless their bats are elite. So yeah, trying to sort of plow through that and then figure out how to integrate a couple of the guys. Hopefully, that should start making their arrivals in the next couple of years. But that's really sort of like the tail end of our reinforcements as well. I mean, frankly, the next round of prospects for us is probably another 3 years off otherwise, at a minimum. So yeah, we're sort of stuck in that gap now where it's like I need to win with the group we have in the next probably 2 seasons. Otherwise, you're going to see an Arlington-esque fire sale in Tempe.
Hopefully not.
I was gonna say, I hope to never see another team go through that, but possibly,
Well, Tempe was technically the first back in the day long before you had them, but with Hancock and that whole debacle. But
That's right. Yeah, Hancock was traded for like, I don't know, 12 players and draft picks or something like that.
12 players, some really garbage draft picks and some money. And he went on to just continue to dominate, and none of those guys did anything.
Right. And Bakersfield won, I think, 2 more championships or something while he was on their staff. So yeah,
I think so.
Pretty clear who won that trade.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, you bring up a good point. It's difficult because I mean, I was running into this when I came back. I originally was in Canton, which changed over to Madison. I was running into the same thing where initially I did just the rebuild internally, sold everything off, went through the draft, tried to pick up pieces here and there, and by the end of it, I know I thought I was confident, but I had pretty much traded away majority of everything in my minors. And I think that's a pretty normal cycle, I would say, because you kind of get that window, and I had this initially with New Jersey. I had like a 5-year window of success, and then we ran out of prospects, and we had to rebuild again after that. Madison, I was just entering that stage, I think, where you're at now, where it's like I thought I was good enough. We just went over 500 for the first season. I gave the team away after that, but I thought we were right there. But then very quickly they collapsed. And to your point now, it's like you have to try to make the updates. Where the heck do you maximize like your increases or your improvements without breaking the bank? Because you can't keep affording bringing guys on like Pulitzer, like you said, and Perez. It's all these $20 million contracts. If you're not winning all the time, just doesn't work, and it ends up backfiring on you. So I don't think it's talked about enough how difficult it is once you kind of get to this stage. Because the other thing, like even for New Jersey's success this year, other teams have to start suffering and doing worse as well. Like you need Aurora starting to fall off a bit and suffer for you to succeed. You need other teams like Palm Springs growing and taking wins away from other teams. There's so much out of your control that needs to happen as well. and then you need to kind of still stay steady enough that you're not making, I guess, big enough mistakes that end up screwing you over. So yeah, it is an incredibly detailed balancing act, which eventually I feel like I screw up all the time too. So after so many seasons, I'll end up screwing it up. I'm sure I almost screwed it up last year and gave up and tried to sell everything off. Thankfully I didn't, but yeah, it's interesting. And then once you get to that point, how do you then grow from there, being a 90 something win team that's a wild card team, to turn into elite without completely blowing everything up and giving away your whole farm? So it's like never ending.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of, I mean, obviously, I'm trying to do the same thing everybody else is trying to do, right? Which is win, while while opening, excuse me, opening a window that stays open for as long as possible. Which is why I've continued to sort of like hoard draft picks, and pretty aggressively go after international free agents. Despite the fact that obviously our payroll has begun climbing quite a bit. I think the striking that balance is difficult, especially when you're doing what we just talked about, right? Because like last year, I think I made a deal with Jay shortly before the trade deadline, which was really, frankly, more out of frustration than anything else. When I dealt for Pedro Coronado, the outfielder, because it was like our team was just stuck in neutral and not going anywhere. And then Mike, you and I made a deal there when I dumped Jaramillo, who mercifully has gotten back on track this year for sure. And so I was just trying to change things for the sake of changing things. It felt like, because we were just stuck. It was like we weren't improving. We were doing the same thing over and over again. And finally, I was tired of looking at the same roster that was just kind of on track to win 85 games. And I started giving up prospects. I mean, I gave up a guy that I signed for $20 million out of Argentina or something like that. Magnaldi, the outfielder that I sent to Florida in that trade, which pained me to do, along with I think a couple other draft picks. But yeah, I mean, the intent there was to try and continue focusing on the future while we were actually bringing these guys up and cycling them through, in the hopes that the bench would become deep enough that some of those guys who were actually stepping up and developing at the major league level, or at least at the high minors, would filter in, take sort of what Toyama's done a lot of. They have a lot of like that 3-star sort of guy who seems to float up to the major league level and just crank out like 4 or 5 more seasons one year after another, which is pretty impressive. I was hoping to develop some sort of roster that was capable of doing that. We have not arrived there yet, obviously, but that's sort of what I've been shooting for here. Although time will tell whether or not I can maintain the window. But yeah, to your point about like the finances too, the idea there is obviously to grow the finances while we are starting to win, in hopes that at some point we can actually retain the vast majority of these guys, rather than just keep them on the books for those first 6-7 years and then trade them away or let them walk in free agency.
Yeah, you want to retain them because you're going to be able to sign them cheaper earlier. Like I just signed Dennis Johnson to a quite friendly 6-year deal as soon as he was able to get a long enough contract. And I know if he goes to free agency, he'd probably get like 20 million plus, and then you're sitting with another guy who costs you 20 plus million. So yeah, the goal is definitely to try to keep your guys, and I think that's what everyone should be striving for. But definitely, I understand the frustration of needing to move guys. I guess let's move on to another question, just so that we don't, because we could talk about this one forever. What would you say is Tempe's identity? Are you guys a pitching team, a home run hitting team? Are you Aurora and Death by a Million just singles, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, the team was definitely built, sort of in the same mold that I think I tried to model a lot of those Crystal Lake teams off of, which was going to be, at least this was my initial plan, sort of a bunch of good arms, right? So depth of rotation, with ground ballers, power pitchers who are also ground ballers, And then a lot of power on offense, right? Because chicks dig the long ball and all that. So yeah, that was sort of what we were shooting for. I'm not totally sure how successful that was. There were a couple things that happened along the way, and one of the big ones was, I think it was either the change from versions to 21 to 22 or 22 to 23. I can't remember now. When OOTP added fielding potential, which from my perspective was a pretty big change, because before, right, we were all assuming, like, hey, I've got the base ratings here, and this is, this guy's range is high enough that I think, at some point in the future, he's going to improve. And so I had acquired a bunch of guys, a couple of them from Madison, while you were still running the club there, Mike, that I kind of anticipated were going to get better defensively to support that sort of ground ball heavy approach that I was taking. And when we rolled over and I found out to the new version, and I found out that none of those guys were going to improve anymore, kind of hit me, in the face, like, crap, I've now built, a team full of like mediocre infield defense to play behind a staff of nothing but ground ballers, which is probably not a great recipe for success. So I've been kind of making moves to rectify that over the last couple of years, and I think it's at a point, at least right now, up the middle, where we're better. Like, it's still not an elite defense by any stretch, but it's good enough to not be terrible, I guess.
Yeah, that was definitely a big update. I remember that. I forget. I think it is probably 2 versions ago. But I remember doing the same thing. I was amazed to see, like, holy cow, I didn't even realize that this guy who's my infielder can dominate in the outfield, or vice versa. Or holy cow, this guy who I thought same thing as you, I'm like, I'm gonna make him a third baseman. No, he sucks. He's not gonna get any better. No matter what you do, he's not gonna get any better. And I had to completely shift guys around, switch philosophies, and I, like you, I am still doing the same thing. I was still piecing together certain positions, shortstop up until this past offseason. I was still trying to find somebody who wasn't a 7, or somebody who was greater than a 7, because I feel like I had tons of guys that were 7s, and they're hot garbage at shortstop compared to any other shortstop that's like an 8, 9, or a 10. And even then, like, I still get guys, or have guys in certain positions where I feel they can be sufficient, and you go look at their fielding metrics and they're like just terrible still. So defense is something I'm still struggling with as well. So I'm not surprised that change, I think, has not been talked about enough of how impactful it has been.
Yeah, and it obviously, it was sort of revelatory to actually be able to see, how these guys were going to grow defensively, and better able to project it out. Importantly, because up to that point, it was just relying on us to sort of guess. Like, I think this guy's probably got room to grow. I mean, theoretically, Carvalhais, I saw that Sean had just pulled him up on the screen there. That was one of those guys that I traded for when, I want to say, he may have been a rookie ball still, or short A when I dealt for him. But the intent there was, and when I made that move to go out and get him, was to make him our shortstop, and sort of a centerpiece of the organization, frankly. Well, lo and behold, I think his rating at shortstop when I got him was a 6, and there was no potential listed when I got him. But I mean, so his improvement there was marginal between the time I picked him up at, let's say, short A, and then got him to the majors. And after, I think a season and a half or so spent as our shortstop, and realizing that effectively all of his metrics were pointing to him being a very lousy, at least by PEBA standards, defensive shortstop. It's like, I've got to move him. I cannot keep him there. And so that was sort of what led to a trade that I swung last year with RJ, actually, where I sent him Rincon, who was my second baseman at the time, and moved Carvalhais over. And shortstop still work in progress.
Yeah, between that and center field, I think those 2 positions they're just never fully perfect.
That's where I know Jay's not here, but that's where the whole Gordon Knopp conversation comes in, where what his real value is. And it's like, he's truly the only center fielder that helps you both areas of the game. He's going to help you on the defensive side, and he's way better than pretty much every other center fielder option on the offensive side. So I know I tried to multiple times talk to Jay about Knopp, but
I feel like
it
we
wasn't
probably all made a run at Knopp at some point now, haven't we?
exactly. Well, and to Jay's credit, it wasn't Jay that rejected the deal on Knopp. It was me that rejected the deal, because it was like, I'm starting to look at what prospects I would have to give, and I'm just like, yeah, he's worth that, but what does that do to my window? And I'm just like, no, I'm not. I'm just going to stay patient, keep trying to make incremental upgrades, but keep the guys that, in my opinion, it would take multiple 4.5, 5-star guys to get a guy like Knopp. And you start adding more up, and that discussion of where you're at that 80 win mark, and it's just like, I can wait a little bit longer, then I can maybe, go with my guys instead of just trading them away.
Yeah, and that, going back to that sort of conversation we were having before we kicked off about the trade with Jay, when Tempe was we were looking at acquiring Van Wandel in the offseason. I mean, that was effectively the exact same point we reached, where it was like, yeah, Van Wandel would have absolutely been worth all of the guys we were giving up, but we sort of reached a point where we're spreading ourselves so thin in order to acquire him that I felt like and then Van Wandel wasn't, the healthiest guy around. And if he goes down, and all of a sudden, that guy that I'm counting on for, these monster 10, 12 war seasons is no longer in the lineup. And I've reduced the rest of my organization to sort of ruins in order to acquire him. Then we're sort of up the proverbial creek. So,
Yeah. Well, just to kind of keep moving our standard questions along here, is there a number one rival that you have in the league that you kind of judge your success on, I guess?
No, and I feel, part of my sense there is that, like, you have to be good to have a rival, and like Tempe's never been all that good, at least not in 25 whatever it is years in game. So, um, and I think we need to sustain some success before we can call anybody else a rival, and climb out of that sort of middle of the both the division and the league there. So yeah, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily anybody that's been a rival. At this point, I'm just trying to sustain like wins against the better teams in the league. Aurora's beaten us up pretty good for the last couple of years, and we have a sim coming tonight, so I hate to say this because I'm going to jinx it, but we're like 9-2 against them so far this year. Which, thank God, I don't even know how the hell that's happened, but maybe if we could just split this last series, I think just about our last series with them, I'll be in pretty good spirits. And then Tempe has slapped us around pretty good the last couple of years too. So I mean, I'm still, as far as I'm concerned, still catching those two, in hopes that I can actually pass them at some point in the future, but we'll see. Jury's out.
Yeah, no, it's always that struggle where you're trying to climb, and you're going up against teams that have consistently had success. So you don't want to jinx yourself when there's still a month left in the season. I know Michael's running against that, where he doesn't want to jinx himself.
I'm not talking about it.
Yeah.
Somehow I got past Greg, and I'm not talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Why would you even bring it up? Dan Vale, who I'm publicly calling out now, when we hit first place back in like June, Dan popped on the Slack, I think like the morning after that sim, and made a mention of it. And I was like, damn it, Dan. I know what you're doing here. I appreciate the sentiment, but you're killing me. And sure enough, we proceeded to just go in the tank for like 5 straight weeks. July was a brutal month in Tempe, and we are only just now starting to recover. So we'll see.
Yeah, I think we did the same thing with Dylan as well. And I was one of the ones who called him out, saying when they were like 20 games back early in the season, going like, what the hell's going on? And all of a sudden he's right back up there.
Right, right.
It's better to just not even jinx yourself. Yeah. So luckily it's a short sim. So hopefully it being only 4 games tonight works in everyone's benefit.
I just want to
Less
split.
pain.
That's all I wanted to split.
Let's see. Do we have any other questions left on the normal list here? I guess, well, who's your favorite player that you got from Madison?
This is sort of an evolving question because I think I've still turned over so much of the roster and still continue to do so. I've got a couple favorites on the team. I still really like the guy who we've got as our #1 starter, Will Taylor, who I traded for from Duluth. I coveted that guy. I think he was in the second PEBA draft I was a part of with Tempe after we came over from the World League. And he's been pretty solidly consistent. I think he's probably never going to get to the level that I was really sort of aspiring that maybe he would reach. But he's been pretty damn good for us. So I can't complain. He's a lefty. Everybody loves a lefty that throws 100 miles an hour or so. And that was kind of the model I was looking for when I was going out and acquiring pitchers early on. But him, and then I also really like Kaporn, who is our center fielder, sort of by default. Again, back to that theme of people whose defense has been lackluster or regressed since we arrived here. But he had a monster year last year, which was only his second full year in the league, and he reached the major league level. I think the year I drafted him, I'm pretty sure I promoted him for the last like week or two of the season just to see what he did, and he's just stuck. And last year, yeah, he hit like 43 home runs, I think it was, and 58 steals, and posted, I don't know, 6.5 WAR. I can't see the screen that well there, but he
During the juiced year.
yes, during the juiced year, and he was a monster. Yeah, he was what Tempe wanted to be as a club. And even though he's been injured and sort of regressed a little bit this year, he's still been pretty damn good. But like most of our offense this season has just been sort of mediocre for the most part. So yeah, I would say that those are probably the two guys, like current guys, that are favorites. If you really want me to answer the Madison question, I will, because even though I didn't acquire him while you were still in Madison, I got Tony Velasquez, who I think probably most of the league has never heard of or paid much attention to.
I was high
Who's been
on him.
Yeah, no, consistently pretty darn good. I mean, he's on pace for a 4.5 WAR year. His ops is over 800. It was last year too. He's been healthy, knock on wood again. And he plays a decent third base. I mean, like the guy kind of does everything pretty well. And now because he was the first guy, because I think you called him up while you were still there, he's set to hit free agency after this year, but he kind of wants a lot of money, and I'm not sure that I can actually swing it. So my gut tells me right now he's probably going to walk after this year, and we're going to be searching for a new option at third base.
Well, we'll see. Maybe if I have any money, I'd be happy to go back after him. Yeah, I had a bunch of guys in Madison that didn't probably excite anybody, but just watching them, and this is where I feel at times, you have to pay more attention to the stats. You have to pay attention more how they're doing, progressing through the levels, and less star ratings and actual ratings and everything. He was one of those guys that I was always like, he's going to be a solid third baseman. Like not, he's not going to be Vito, but he's going to be consistent and well enough. And I mean, I was going to get ready to take a chance on him, but I'm happy to see that he's still succeeding over there for you.
Yeah, no, he's done well, and I'd love to hang on to him. I just don't think I don't think, because we're a year, at least according to the projections now, we're a year and a half away from a payroll that's about to balloon to about 160 million. So if I add, his demand of, I think is around 15 last I checked, a year on, we're going to start running out of space real quick because our budget is still sitting around 180 million.
And I will say, not to make things weird, but I am going to have to take off because the cleaning people are here.
All right. No, appreciate it. And
So you're going to have to finish this one without me.
no, that's perfectly fine. Thank you, Michael, for being on here. I think it's a really good point to kind of cut off here as well. It's just showing I've got the salary screen up now, but just showing kind of what you were saying, Brian, of what you're looking at moving forward and the different things you're going to have to decide on, and kind of the squeeze that you're in right now. So I think we're at a good spot to cut off and kind of look at next time what we do, but we'll definitely have you on again because I think Tempe's on the rise, and there's definitely a lot for people around the league to learn about just how the things you're talking about, where you're planning on, you're building certain ways and different things you're looking at. So appreciate that aspect, and we'll definitely have you on again soon.
Sounds good. I appreciate it, Sean. Thank you guys for continuing to do these and providing us commuting fodder for our ears. Appreciate it.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. We'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.